Hi everyone, I want to tell you about two cool events coming up that you may be interested in. So bear with me really quick and we'll get straight to today's episode very shortly. The first event is the 5th annual ABA Leadership Summit that takes place on November 8th, 2019 at the Hilton Orange County in Costa Mesa, California. It'll also be streamed online. This event will provide 6 supervision Type 2 CEs and will feature speakers such as Sarah Troutman, Paul Gavoni, Nick Weatherly, Brett DeNovi, and Isaac Bermudez. Check out today's show notes for links or go to brettdassociates.com and click the CE tab. The second event is the OBM 2.0 workshop that's being hosted by my friends at Connections Behavior Planning and Intervention. It's being held on January 18th and 19th in 2020 at Green River Community College in Auburn, Washington. For more information, visit connections-behavior.com/events. And again, there'll be links in today's show notes as well. All right, on to today's episode. What does private equity investment, diversity in applied behavior analysis, and sports all have in common? Well, it just so happens that all three of these topics are things I'll be chatting about on today's episode with Beverly and Kirk Kirby of Team ABA. At last year's ABAI, Rick Cabina introduced me to this dynamic duo, and boy, do they have a great story to tell. And I'm really happy they're doing so on the Behavioral Observations podcast. Along with Rick and Mark Dixon, Beverly was on a panel that I chaired that discussed the role of big money in ABA. Mark discussed the business side of Peak, and Rick talked about the founding and subsequent purchase of Chartlytics by Central Reach. And then Beverly shared the story of how the Kirby started the Sparks Group, a company that was dedicated to serving the underserved in the DC metro area. Sparks went on to be acquired by a private equity investor, and Beverly shared the lengthy and challenging process of selecting an investor that would continue to provide high-quality ABA services in an ethical manner. Whether you're a business owner or not, this is a great story, and you'll learn a lot from it. The Kirbys went on to found the aforementioned Team ABA. Team ABA provides services that are quite varied, but a lot of what they do is focused on using ABA for improving sports performance and addressing wellness. And if you caught the last episode with Rick Cabina, he mentioned some of the cool stuff that they've been doing in the realm of sports performance. We, of course, dig into this in more detail in this particular episode. The Kirbys are also passionate about improving the diversity in our field. They've done quite a bit of outreach to historically black colleges to provide internships and other opportunities for students of color. This is an issue that doesn't get talked about a lot in our field, and to be candid, this is a long overdue discussion on this podcast. I'm grateful that they were able to share this with me and by extension the broader audience of Behavioral Observations. So before we get to this show, I do want to give a couple of quick shout outs. First to behavioruniversity.com and second, the University of Cincinnati online behavior analysis program, both of them for sponsoring this episode. We'll be hearing about them later. And then I also want to give a shout out to the folks at Tate Behavioral for inviting me, Megan Miller, Ryan O'Donnell, and Kim Barons to be part of the first annual Tate Behavioral Conference last week in Springfield, Mass. They were amazing hosts, and it was an honor to be a part of their inaugural event. All right, enough talking by me. Let's get to the interview. So without any further ado, please enjoy this fun conversation with Beverly and Kirk Kirby.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sicoria.
Beverly and Kirk Kirby, welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How's it going?
It's going very well. Thank you. We are very happy to be here.
Yeah, what she said. Thank you.
All right, Zach, you're going to be your answer the whole time?
Yeah, I'll just refer to the pretty lady.
That's right. That's a strategy I found. Oh boy, it was awesome meeting you guys at ABAI last May, and I appreciate you guys touching base with me and helping to make this conversation happen. I think we've got a couple of different storylines to follow here that I'm excited to dig into.
As well, we are as well. I mean, we're very excited to talk about it and hopefully disseminate some good information.
Awesome. So let's kick off the show by sharing how you got into behavior analysis. And let's start with you, Beverly.
Well, I have kind of a long history in behavior analysis. I started I started in the field in undergrad, which we won't talk about how long ago that was, but I did an internship. Well, it might kind of talk about it because I did an internship at a robust replication site as a senior in college. And I didn't know anything about ABA. I didn't know anything about autism. I just knew that I wanted to do something that wouldn't require any exams. And so I started an internship. I worked with a little girl with autism one-on-one, and I learned so much from that internship that I decided that that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. It was so interesting that strategies that I could implement had such a direct and meaningful impact on her life that, it was just life-changing for me. And so after graduation, I went to work at Kennedy Krieger. I worked there on the neurobehavioral unit for a few years. And then I decided that I wanted to get more, kind of move a little bit away from research and do more practical. Well, I wanted to do more direct work one-on-one. So I started working in some home programs while I went back to school to get my master's in special education. I taught for several years while also doing home-based ABA programs, like most of us, as a therapist, and then sort of worked my way up into being a behavior analyst. And in 2010, Kirk and my husband and I, started the Sparks Group with a couple of our other partners, Soraya Dos Santos and John Hellman, and we started the Sparks Group where we did home-based programs for children with autism in the DC metropolitan area. We sold that company in 2018, and then we started Team ABA.
All right, very cool. So there's a lot of gaps that I want to fill in there because you were very humble in how you kind of packaged that all in a very short period of time. So definitely want to go back and perhaps fill in some of the details there. Before we do that, though, Kirk, tell us how you got into ABA, please.
So I'm the Johnny come lately to the group. Just like Beverly said, in 2010, we started the Sparks Group. And originally, the working relationship was going to be that Beverly handled everything that was clinical, and I handled everything that was on business relations. Later into trying to learn about the business, I discovered that the science can be used in other areas especially in areas that I'm extremely passionate about, namely sports. And from there, I guess the passion grew. While we owned the Sparks Group, I started doing direct services with the kiddos, and I just fell in love with it. So as we got along and basically sold the company, I decided that, hey, I'm full in. So I went back to school to work on a second master's degree in applied behavior analysis, but then also starting up a dual degree in sports psychology, which we can, I guess, talk about later on.
Sure.
But my background, I have an undergraduate degree in journalism and a master's degree in English. So I'm not even I wasn't anywhere near the field until I really caught the bug, and it's just been a really great roller coaster ride just all the way through it. And I can never there's no regrets actually the regrets I have is that I should have started when Beverly started in undergrad.
Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Skinner was an English major, so maybe you have a closer connection than you realize.
Exactly.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So, so I met you guys as I said at ABAI, and Beverly, you were on the panel that I was kind of emceeing, and you talked about Sparks and how you started it, and just very passionate terms about the folks that you want to provide services to. So rather than me do a disservice to that and try to paraphrase it, tell me about kind of the motivation to start Sparks in the first place.
So the Sparks Group was really a vision that our partner Soraya Dos Santos and I, my partner Soraya Dos Santos and I had while we were working. So we started when we were working in home programs. We primarily worked with parents who were private pay, and so just in that alone, it kind of speaks to the population that we were able to work with. And so it was predominantly really upper middle class, suburban families, predominantly white families. And I am obviously African American, Soraya is Latina. And we were very passionate about the idea of reaching out and being able to work with people of color and to be able to go back into our own communities. Both of us came from more working class communities. And so we wanted to be able to deliver services specifically to people of color in working class and or lower class in neighborhoods. And so that's what we did. And so Kirk was really instrumental in sort of pushing that forward and helping us to find opportunities where we would be able to do that, because the reality of it is that business requires somebody to pay for it, So if we had unlimited resources, we would have been happy to go into those neighborhoods to work for free. But the reality is that you can't do that, right? So you have to be able to find someone who is willing to pay for that. And fortunately, in this area, it was kind of one of the first ones that really kind of had those services covered by Medicaid and insurance companies and things of that nature. So we were able to go into the more diverse areas and provide services, which was critically important to us, because we wanted to be able to provide services to populations that just weren't getting them at the time.
And so you're in the DC metro area?
Yes.
That's okay. And both of you guys can kind of jump in to here, but tell me about the growth of the Sparks Group. So it sounds like that, the mission was based on some really, kind of core values of serving, those communities.
Yes. So for us,
a good story here to tell perhaps might be, how the group evolved over time. And so if you can tell us a little bit about that, that would be great.
So like I said, we started we started with just the two clinicians kind of on the ground working, but right away we wanted to make sure that the Sparks Group reflected our diverse community. And so we are very fortunate in the DC area to have people of all races, ethnicities and that nature. It's a very diverse population. And so we were committed right from the very beginning. I mean, even in our mission statement and all of our vision and values, diversity was always a topic on the table. And so we wanted to make sure that, and when I say diversity, it's really important to realize, especially when we're talking about ethnic and racial diversity, that it's not just all, African Americans or all Latinos that we were representing. So we had in our clinical staff, we had everyone, and so we were committed to reaching out to universities in the area to be able to start building our own clinical staff. I think that's something that a lot of companies look at doing, but our particular focus was how can we make sure that we are grooming African American and Latino or Spanish speaking clinicians. And so we specifically reached out to a local HBCU, which is a historically Black college or university, and we started an internship so that we could introduce this field to undergrads in the same way that I had been introduced. I did not attend an HBCU. And so because of that, I had an opportunity that I might not have had I gone to an HBCU. And so we wanted to make sure that we could expose students in those populations to a field that I think, everyone should do, actually.
Right.
And then also, because to my knowledge, and of course this is an area for growth for me, to my knowledge, there aren't any necessarily predominantly universities that are predominantly targeted towards Latinos or the Spanish-speaking population. So what we did is we went to some other large universities, and we specifically reached out to their Latino or their Spanish heritage groups on the campus to specifically reach for interns in that manner. So not to say that our internship program wasn't open to people who didn't fit into those two categories, but those were the specific groups that we were targeting, because we knew that those groups are underrepresented in this industry, and we wanted to make sure that they had an opportunity to be exposed to it at a very basic early level, because I think that's how you get the interest.
Yeah, you can see that direct effect. That's definitely the gateway drug, if you will, to
right.
Getting it. So it's pretty clear when you see behavior change, and then when you're the one responsible for it, for better or worse, it's definitely eye opening. So.
Absolutely. I will say that as an undergrad, that was what really kicked it off for me. It was just kind of like I worked with. And I'll never forget, I think most of us remember like anyone who's worked directly in the field, like we remember the first kid that we worked with, and it's kind of like being able to help her learn. I didn't know that's what it was called at the time, but like functional communication to help decrease her inappropriate behavior. And it was just like, it was textbook, like it was perfect. Like the more that she learned to communicate, the less she tried to beat me up. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic.
Right. Yeah, I remember those thoughts myself as an undergraduate, although my first experiences were with pigeons and not people. But the larger picture was that, hey, this is an aspect at the time of psychology that has a very quick and direct effect. So, talk to me about some of the universities and colleges you guys worked with. I'm curious just to know who you were able to connect with.
So our primary internship was with Bowie State University. I would be remiss if I didn't step aside and let Kirk talk about his passion. So I'm going to turn it over to Kirk.
Sure.
So it was kind of weird, as Beverly mentioned, that Bowie State University was the school that we reached out to and started our internship program, because it's actually a rival university within the conference of my alma mater, Virginia Union. So it was always been, my personal passion as a HBCU graduate to bring opportunities to Virginia Union. However, circumstances didn't work out that way. So you're going to your arch rival. But we reached out to Bowie State. Bowie State's career development division was very open to what we were looking to do. The department chair for the psychology department, the same way. From there, we reached out to the University of Maryland with their Latino student union. And gradually, we've reached out to universities, colleges, and universities, not just like the four-year colleges, but the community colleges within the Maryland system. And now it's really we're circling back to going to my passion, reaching out to Virginia Union in hopes of starting the first graduate program in behavior analysis at an HBCU. Currently, the only program at a historically Black college and university is an undergraduate program at Savannah State University in Georgia. So we're hopefully moving towards making that a reality in the next few years. We know that we still have our strong relationship with Bowie State. Beverly has been offered a position, as accepted position as an advisor to the university in hopes of later on starting a program there at an undergraduate class that I believe we're calling it ABA 101. Is that correct, Beverly?
Yes.
So yes, it's really been a passion, just not only to reach out to the HBCUs in the area, but to really kind of try to put together an inclusive program for everyone. And I believe that we are making strides to that.
Have you ever been part of a team composed of capable, accomplished members that underachieved or failed to launch an initiative successfully? Do you work with teams where members burn out, get in conflict, misbehave, or act in ways that contradict the purpose of the group? Are you currently working with other people towards a common goal and aiming to ensure that every member is empowered for maximum contribution and long-term sustainable engagement? Then consider attending the OBM 2.0, the Pro-Social Teaming Model workshop, which will be taught by Drs. Darnell Latal and Tom Sabo. This workshop is being put on by my friends at Connections Behavior Planning and Intervention. It's being held at Green River Community College in Auburn, Washington on January 18th and 19th, 2020. Attendees will learn the pro-social model, which is an evidence-based practice to promote employee engagement, cooperation, high-level performance, and complex organizational problem-solving. The pro-social approach incorporates findings from Nobel Prize-winning research conducted by Elinor Ostrom, with corresponding findings from research in evolutionary science, behavior analysis, ACT, and OBM. Participants will practice core skills and then implement them in a series of challenging role plays that simulate real-life organizational behavioral crises. This workshop will walk attendees through the entire process of creating sustainable team-based outcomes through expert instruction and experiential learning. The workshop itself will provide 16 CEUs, and there's a remote follow-up option that can extend this to 22 CEUs. Space is limited for this event, and the prices go up as we get closer to the dates. So you're going to want to register for OBM 2.0 straight away. And to help defray costs, the folks at Connections have offered listeners a discount. So for more information, check out connections-behavior.com/events and be sure to use the code podcast25.
Wow, that's cool.
I want to say really quickly that I know that we've had a number of people reach out to us, and they'll say something like, we're really interested in starting a partnership with an HBCU. So obviously, if you know anything about university systems, you can't start at the top, right? So our ultimate goal is to start a graduate program, a BCBA program, but you can't start there, right? You have to kind of convince them that this is something that's worth doing. And the conversations that we've had conversations with Morgan State. I know that we've had conversations with Howard University. And the conversations that we typically have when we talk to those programs is that they're looking for, especially in this day and age, they're looking for majors that will allow their students to have a job when they graduate, right? Because that is the biggest push. Well, for us, that's why we started with an internship program, because we said, we can train you with a skill that is marketable. Like when you finish our program, you can get a job, period. And so we actually, the first 2 classes that we had of interns, we hired those people once they finished our internship. And we hired them as, part-time RBTs. And I think that is a major selling point, because that's what universities are looking for these days, is how can they make sure that their students, when they graduate, have a job and more than just have a job, but a career path, which I think that's what this is. So I think it's a pretty easy selling point once you're able to make those contacts.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing as you were describing your outreach, because there's so many verified core sequence providers popping up, I think, to capitalize on this need to provide these services. So hopefully that these circumstances will help your cause in convincing the powers that be that this is a good thing to do.
I think so.
Absolutely.
So I want to come back to that piece in a second, but I want to spend some time talking about the Sparks Group and getting into what some of the things you were talking about at the panel, Beverly. You guys, as you mentioned, you started the Sparks Group in 2010 and sold it. You said in 2018. You said
Yes.
All right. So that must have seemed like a whirlwind to build up this agency and to do all these great things that you were just describing, and then to be in a position to get offers from private equity. And so, for those who weren't at the panel, we had a kind of discussion about big money and ABA. I think Mark Dixon kind of this usual tongue-in-cheek style, I think, termed it ABA sells out or something along those lines. But it was a fun chat, and I was happy to play a part in it. And I think one of the things that I think is a worry in the field is this big money coming in and buying up mom and pop, if you will, practices that are run by BCBAs who are tied to this code of conduct, if you will, this professional ethics code. And if you have kind of people who aren't moored to those foundations, running things and looking at the balance sheet predominantly as your guiding factor, there's a worry that services will decline. And certainly you see and hear horror stories of these sorts of things happening. And it almost seems like, the vision I have in my mind is of like Pac-Man, like going and gobbling up all these small agencies. You described, Beverly, this really careful approach that you guys took. It almost sounded like you guys agonized over this decision. So if you could walk us through what that was like from the moment in which you start, let me just start by asking this. Were you guys approached out of the blue and were intending to sell? Or did you have it in mind that, hey, maybe this is something that we can eventually, parlay into something else or something in between? So how did this come about in the first place?
So I want to start with saying that when we started the Sparks Group, it never occurred to me that this was something that someone would want to purchase. It just never did. I just thought, I'm really passionate about working with children on the spectrum. I'm very passionate about working with families and making a difference in their lives. And I just thought I was better at it than most people. So, as typical behavior analyst, very arrogant. And so, it just never occurred to me. And it was just about, for me, it was about providing good services, good quality services, and doing, what we thought was most appropriate. And so, and forgive me if I get the dates wrong, but I want to say probably right around 2014 was the first time that we were actually approached by someone who kind of said, hey, there's a value to this, that might be, something to consider. And so we started talking to different agencies. At that point, it was just kind of like, well, let's just see what the company is worth. At that time, I honestly was not interested in selling at all. I was just kind of like, well, it's an exercise of, well, let's see what this is all about. And so we had a couple of offers. Like I said, at that time, I wasn't really interested at all. I wasn't interested at all in anyone who was only in it for the payout, the money aspect of it. And so we kind of had a couple of conversations. I said, this is not really what I'm interested in doing right now. And so we just kind of put it on the back burner, and we just continue to kind of do our deliver services as we had been, continue to grow. Again, still not with the idea in mind that we would eventually sell, but again, just growing because we wanted to be able to provide services to good quality services to as many kids as we could reasonably. And so when you fast forward to about 2017, I kind of thought we had sort of reached the end of what we could do in a timely fashion, right? So we were providing good services. We were growing our home-based services. We were really interested in expanding. But the potential for growth was slow. It would have been slow and methodical. And it just kind of felt like, well, if we had some other opportunities, possibly we could do this a little bit faster. And so we thought, let's start talking to some other entities who might be able to share our vision and do what we're looking to do faster. Okay. And so that's what we started to do. So we started to talk to some groups, private equity groups, or whatever you want to call them. And excuse me, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We talked to quite a few different entities. And there were definitely some meetings where right away I just said, no, I'm not interested at all. I was very committed. And I keep saying there was a group. It wasn't just me. But, we were really interested in finding someone who shared our vision. And I know that when you start something at your kitchen table, it's impossible that you will find someone who sees everything exactly the same way that you do. But it was very important to me that that they would continue their commitment to diversity. We had started the very, very early stages of bringing in employees with disability on the autism spectrum. And so that was very important as well. I firmly believe that those of us that deliver these types of services, we are best equipped to provide job opportunities to the population that we work with. And so that was something that we were just starting. And that was something that I was very interested in making sure that would continue. And so we had lots and lots of conversations with the organization that we finally decided to sell to about our vision, our mission. They kept the majority of our upper management team in place. And those people were very well aware of what we were trying to do. And so it was just really critical that we aligned ourselves with an organization that would continue that vision. And I know based on just some of the things that have continued since selling that they have remained true to that.
Okay.
And so that makes me feel good.
Good. I'm still fascinated by this, I don't know, the only phrase that comes to mind is like the anatomy of the private equity approach, and how people connect with you or contact with you. And that whole kind of almost sounds like an interview process or vetting process with these different providers. And just to my silly way of thinking, when you hear private equity, you think of like a bunch of guys in a wood panel boardroom, lighting cigars with $100 bills, wearing monocles, and and I know it's not that, but it's just it's just this kind of caricature we have of quote unquote big business, or what have you. What can you talk about some what are the type of organizations that approached you? Is it one of these things where these, it's kind of an organization that has holdings in all sorts of different industries, and ABA practices just one in their portfolio. So this is kind of new territory for me. So, and I'm thinking it might be for some of the listeners. So if you can help kind of challenge that caricature I have of the Planters peanut guy, coming with his briefcase and green eye shades and things like that.
All of the companies or entities that we talked to were in the mental health field globally. And so there were some that were probably more into maybe mental health, or maybe they had group homes or something along those lines, and they were looking to extend their portfolios. Those were the entities that we weren't as interested in. We were more interested in companies that were already in the ABA space. And so they perhaps they had BCBAs on their leadership team. Some of their other acquisitions were also ABA companies, that sort of thing. And so we weren't necessarily interested in being a part of a bigger group, but we weren't ever approached, I don't think, and maybe Kirk, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we were ever approached by, say, an entity that had nothing to do with health or didn't work with children at all. So everyone that was interested in us was in the behavioral health space, but not necessarily working specifically with children with autism, or not necessarily working doing behavior analysis.
I see. Okay.
Or would you say that
That is true. Ultimately, the entity that we sold to had acquired different mom and pop shops all over. But just to back up, to piggyback on what Beverly said, that it was an ambiguous group that were working in that larger space of mental health, which in the process was really the key. Asking the appropriate questions, kind of filling out the vision to allow us to kind of make a discerned decision if we wanted to entertain this more, because we want to make sure that the values lined up, the symmetry, everything. So yes, that was pretty much like what we were working with initially.
I see. Okay. That's helpful, because this is just foreign to me altogether. And for some reason, it just kind of this whole, I've been around behavior analysis for a little while, and just how this field is just growing up so rapidly around us, and all these little, I don't know what to call them, but just something like the idea of starting, I would probably have the same mindset that you guys had, going back a decade or so, starting a practice, not having any intention whatsoever that it could be something that someone would want to buy, let alone the desire to sell or anything like that. So and fast forward to, 2019, you see these things happening, quite a bit. So it's just, I think as Rick Cabina said at that panel, like private equity is coming to the table, and it's just, not a question of should we, but it's how, perhaps, and I'm open to arguments to the contrary, but it seems like to, I don't know, just the way things, I don't know. So I can go on a tangent with this, which I'll kind of restrain myself from for the time being. But anyway, I could go off on a tangent too. I mean, I think that it could be, it can be positive, and there definitely can be negatives, for sure. But I think that, I think that the thing that's the most important to remember is what is most important to you. So if you are a small business owner, figuring out what is really important to you. And then if you are thinking about, or I'm sure you're probably being approached these days, if you're being approached all the time. And it is something that you're considering, just figuring out what is the most important thing to you for the future of your business, and what is the best way or easiest way to get there. I think that that's really critical. And I think that as behavior analysts, we need to make sure that we have a space at the table with those conversations. It can be really intimidating, especially when you're talking to people who are, they have their MBAs and, this is what they do. It can be really intimidating, but as behavior analysts, we understand behavior. And so it's not just
a skill that we use when we're working with kids. It's a skill that you can use when you're sitting at those negotiating tables and really making sure that you're getting what you want out of the deal. And so, yeah, I could go on and on about that.
Could I add something to that?
Please do, yeah.
So I guess give a little background. When we were first approached, just like Beverly was saying, that, we were just entertaining to see if our company, our baby, had value. Like, what in the world? Why would anybody want to buy something that, that this is just like we started, and we didn't really kind of understand the impact that we had in big business, if we had a impact in big business. The second time around, when we kind of understood where we were in the marketplace, to give a little bit of context, I came from this old school where if you started a business, and I've started a successful business beforehand, that you hold on to it, you pass it down to your children, your children pass it down to their children, and so on and so forth. So, from my perspective, it was never going to be that we were going to sell. I know we could go harken back to when we first started the Sparks Group. And I remember Beverly, we were sitting in the kitchen table, actually the bedroom, figuring out like names, what we're going to call the company. She always had this philosophy that, hey, I just want to go out and just service kids and just provide like good ABA. And I was agreeing on that, but Beverly had in her mind that, we're going to have maybe 20 clients, maybe 10 to 15 or so between myself and Soraya. In the back of my mind, no, we're going to have several locations, and we're going to be big. We're going to have a significant impact in this field. We met halfway in between, but in the process of building that, it's like your baby, and now you have these outsiders coming in, flashing their big money and their cigars and all, and it's quite daunting. But just like Beverly said, we're the best in the world at understanding human behavior. Live that particular skill in all aspects of your professional career. It should not be intimidating to sit down with these individuals who have MBAs and have experience in this, because you're the most knowledgeable person about your business. You're the foremost authority on your business, and you know what you want out of it. So I guess this is like the advice period.
We're getting the advice early, but that's okay.
Get it early.
Early and often.
Exactly. Have no fear. If private equity firms come knocking at your door, have no fear. Talk to them. Entertain them. Decide if this is the right situation or the right time. There's no rush. There's not a gun to your head. Again, just like Beverly said, you kind of have to rely on your values and your what you want for your company to make those decisions. But with all of the things all of the variables that come with these, I don't want to call them outsiders, but they are outsiders.
Sure.
Just rely on your training, rely on your confidence, rely on your ability to work through this, and really seek advice. Seek advice from individuals that have gone through this process, that are in the field. We're out here. We're always ready to just give our experiences and kind of help you guide through that for those individuals. And I'm sure that there are individuals who've gone through the process like we have, that would agree that, listen, my phone is always on. Just give me a call or send an email. But that's the one thing that I would like to pass along. Just
Sure.
Have no fear.
All right, cool. Well, we'll make sure people know how to reach you in the show notes of this episode. And guys, thanks for indulging me, because it's just an area that I find fascinating as just kind of an observer and, part-time historian, I suppose, in some respects.
Well, I would also, kind of piggybacking on what Kirk said, I would also invite business owners to entertain some of those concepts. Even before maybe you're not really thinking about selling, just sort of have those conversations so that when you get to the point, or if you get to the point when you decide you do want to sell, then it isn't as intimidating because you kind of start to understand the process. Mm-hmm. Practice, of course, repeated practice always makes everything better. So I think that would be helpful, just to, and it also gives you a position of power, right? Because if you go into a conversation saying, I'm ready to walk away, I'm not desperate, I'm not, I don't need you, I just kind of want to hear what you have to offer.
Are you in need of continuing education? Well, Behavior University is a BACB approved continuing ed provider, and their mission is to provide university quality courses and ABA for new and experienced professionals alike. Their live webinars generally have a limited number of attendees so that the learning experience is highly interactive. And if you can't make the live events, these webinars are recorded and available in Behavior University's CEU library for later viewing. Behavior University also has a 40-hour RBT training. This self-paced course uses a combination of visual presentation, audio lectures, and live video models to teach all areas of the RBT task list. The course is accessible anytime and from anywhere. So if you'd like to learn more, head on over to behavioruniversity.com/observations, where you'll find a 10% discount for podcast listeners. Again, that's behavioruniversity.com/observations. And thanks for checking them out.
Sure.
It puts you in a better position of power.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think there's a business cliche, and sometimes cliches have a way of circulating and perpetuating because sometimes they have some value of, dig your well before you're thirsty, I think is how it goes.
Exactly.
Awesome. So I want to circle back to the diversity issue and for a minute and talk about it in the context of the field of behavior analysis. And perhaps, you guys were, the part where you talked about the services you're providing in the communities that you're practicing was great. And so what I want to do is kind of zoom out a little bit and look at, diversity from the context of, practitioners in the field, and things along those lines. So I guess one of the thoughts I had is, when I love the idea of, getting, as you guys were talking about earlier, something going and, a verified course sequence, at a historically Black college. But just in terms of looking at the provider base that we have currently in the field, obviously, I don't think I don't have any hard stats on this to cite off the top of my head, and I think there's actually a special issue of diversity in the behavior analysis and practice that's coming out a little bit that I'm thinking will shed some light on this. But let's just be honest. Our field is kind of non-diverse. It's, or maybe I could just take the kind of out of the sentence. I don't know. We're kind of joking around before we started here, before we actually hit the record button. That I'm kind of just owning the fact that I'm a white guy living in the perhaps one of the whitest states in the country, and when you go to ABAI or something like that, it kind of looks like that too. And I'm not sure if I have an actual question here, but I guess one of the things I'm thinking about is obviously you have the outreach to the colleges and things like that. I'm thinking some of these initiatives will take some time, but flipping it around the other way, there are a lot of, for lack of a better term, non-diverse ABA providers supporting individuals of color. Mm-hmm. And so, and I think this is an issue. We haven't really had an episode on like cultural competence or anything like that. But I'm wondering what thoughts you guys might have for folks who are in that position, and so if you can talk a little bit about that, I think that would be helpful to our listeners.
Yes. So I want to sort of start off by saying that really sort of highlighting the fact that in this particular conversation, when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about racial and ethnic, and that there are so many other diverse considerations.
For sure.
I always want to make sure that I acknowledge that, because there are so many other things. And, and I know that one of the things that has mostly been talked about recently, before we kind of brought in race and ethnicity, was the gender diversity, making sure that women had a seat at the table on every level. And so I want to make sure that I bring up the fact that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So we can focus on making sure that women are treated appropriately, and also work on racial and ethnic diversity, and also work on, sexuality or gender identity, and, all of those other variables, and also work on making sure that we're including the populations that we work with in our workforce. So we can do all of those things at the same time. Okay. So just having kind of put that disclaimer out there, sure. I want to kind of circle back to how do you, if you have a workforce, if you have a client base that is largely minority, and then your clinicians are not, what's something that you can do? Well, one of the first things that we did, even within our own organization, is we sort of did some in-services to talk about if we had behavior techs or RBTs. Hey, are any of you interested in becoming behavior analysts or, BCABAs? And what are some things that we can do to kind of help support you through that process? And so I think that that would be the first thing that I would do, because chances are, if you are working in an environment where there are your population is largely minority, there's probably a pretty good chance that on your RBT level staff that you probably have a number of RBTs that reflect that community. Mm-hmm. And so, and there are all sorts of variables that need to be taken into consideration in terms of finances and how you can pay to go through a program. So, but I think that having those conversations with the people that are already working for your organization, I think that that's sort of the first step. Is, have you thought, hey, you're a really great behavior tech, or you're a really fantastic RBT. Have you thought about going back to school to get your master's degree in behavior analysis? Let's talk about what that could be, and let's also talk about, what are the barriers that may be in the way of that happening, and how we can support you as an organization. I would say that that's probably the first step.
Okay. Very good. All right. Well, I know there's probably a lot more we could say on this, but I know we have some other, let me just ask this, because I want to get to the Team ABA stuff that you guys kind of teased us with, because that's a fun conversation unto itself. But before we leave this topic, I just want to make sure if there's anything else that you want to leave the audience with before we change gears here, that you have the opportunity to do so. Otherwise, I want to hear all about Team ABA.
Yeah, I guess really quickly, did I cut you off, Bev? I'm sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Ladies first. Always.
Oh goodness, I don't want to touch that gender implication. But anyway, I'm just kidding. I do also want to highlight that, kind of circling back to you, Matt, where you said, you're kind of a white guy in a really white area, and so. I did a discussion last year, or earlier this year rather, where we talked about what diversity really means. And so to me, diversity really means making sure that your organization reflects the community that you work with. So if your community is all, the same, then it would be really difficult to expand beyond that. And I don't necessarily want to put pressure on people to create, unrealistic expectations, but you do want to look at your community and make sure that you are reflective of that community. Also, looking at the community to say, are there pockets of this community that we're missing because we don't have anyone on our staff that reflects that specific pocket? And is that something that we would want to correct? And so I think that is really an important part of the conversation as well. I mean, we could certainly talk about how do we make sure that the entire country is diverse, but the reality of it is that people, live where they live, and it just is what it is. And so I don't want people to feel like, oh, well, I've got to go out and get people on my staff if that's not realistic for them. But I always think that it should be a part of the conversation, and it should be on the table. It should be something that we're thinking about. And I'm hopeful that some of the organizations that support behavior analysis, like APBA and ABAI and the BACB and all of those organizations will continue their push into the diversity discussion and making sure that in those organizations that we have people that their leadership also is reflective of the diversity that we are hoping to foster throughout. And I also want to say that that doesn't necessarily just mean that you have people of color on your diversity special interest group.
Right.
Right. So, we are having this discussion today. We're talking about diversity, but you're also talking to us as business owners. And then we're going to talk about expanding behavior analysis outside of working with children with autism. So the goal of this conversation isn't you're talking to us because we're both African American. And so I want to make sure that is brought up as well, is that, people of color can talk about things beyond just what does it mean to be diverse.
Right.
Wow.
That's
what an awesome point.
That's why I married her.
Yeah, good man.
I don't have to say anything. Like, literally, thank you, Beth. Thank you for eloquently saying that was what was on my mind.
All right. Well, let's change gears here and talk about some of this other stuff. And so you guys, when you sold the Sparks Group, started Team ABA after that. Rick Cabina in a recent episode, I think, talked you guys up a little bit. And so the audience may have some familiarity with what you guys do. But for those who might not have caught that part of the show, tell us what Team ABA is. And I also want to learn what was the inspiration for starting this in the first place.
Okay. Well, Team ABA is a group of behavior analysts and then also content experts that delivers the science of behavior into non-traditional areas. And one of the areas that we specialize in is in sports. It's one of my passions as a former collegiate athlete that I wanted to look into bringing the science into athletics. And again, like you mentioned before, we were entertaining that idea with the Sparks Group. But the inspiration came when obviously we had free time to kind of think about what is our next mission? What is our next goal? And again, one of the things that we kind of talked about was how do we go about utilizing applied behavior analysis in sports? There's so much history. There's so much research, over 50 years of research out there, but we felt that it was not that many practitioners actually applying the science. And hey, what a great idea just to kind of like work in that space and kind of deliver great services that we're used to doing with the Sparks Group, but with a whole different population. So we went out and embarked in creating this. And one of the things that we were really passionate about and really like wanted to make sure that we're doing this the correct way is to really align ourselves with some great team members. And one of the first people that I wanted to reach out to was Dr. Natalie Parks, who specializes in OVM, but has a similar background like Beverly, came up through the ranks at Kennedy Krieger, albeit at a different time, and just has a wealth of knowledge of just the field. I realized that, having, her diverse background, her diverse clinical background, having her knowledge and understanding of organizational behavior management, it's so key to working with not only just with athletes, but with coaches and GMs, organizations, to ensure that their organization, their practices are streamlined. From there, we were introduced to Wesley Lowery, who had the same passion I had. He had played basketball in high school, came up through the ranks as a behavior analyst working with kids, and just really wanted to just go down the route of trying to figure out, hey, this knowledge that I have, this skill set that I have, how can I apply it into something that I really, truly love? So obviously there was an instant connection from that. And then I wanted to go big whale fishing. So that's when I approached Rick Cabina, and I remember distinctly, that we always, it was traditional that we would go up to the Penn State Autism Conference. And I knew that I was working out my little elevator pitch to Rick. Obviously, we had a prior relationship as business owners when he owned Chartlytics. We went through some of the seminars. We talked about applying Chartlytics to our practice. So we already had a working relationship. We already knew each other, admired him from a distance. Did not know that he actually kind of had a similar admiration for us as well. So, but in that fact, just kind of talking to Rick and talking about some of the goals of Team ABA, and finding out that he had the same ideas and goals and wanted to apply persistent teaching to working with athletes as well. So it kind of all came together in a whirlwind. It was like, I'm looking around, I'm like, wait a minute, we have all these people that are kind of following us like we're the Pied Piper here. And, what the heck are we doing, But we got a chance to apply just our science to a basketball team in St. Louis, which is actually Natalie's alma mater. And we worked with the team. I actually moved out to St. Louis for the entire season, which, Beverly is not going to allow me to do that ever again. But we were boots on the ground. We were applying a lot of different cool stuff as far as shaping behavior, shaping how to shoot free throws correctly, modeling, using the behavior skills training model, and doing a lot of really cool stuff, but then actually venturing into frequency building through persistent teaching, and just kind of coming together with it. And really, that is the really cool thing about this, that we're creating a whole new space, a whole new industry using something that we love and we know, it's just, again, really a whirlwind experience.
Well, I think I mentioned this when I spoke with Rick, but when people talk about sports psychology more generally, the default is some sort of mentalistic explanation of, grit or, I don't know,
In the zone,
mental toughness. And,
right.
Sports, I think, is awash in cliches. And, just look at any post-game interview, with the winning team, and, you'll hear quite a few of them. But this is real sports psychology, using the science of behavior. So sounds really, really fascinating. One of the things I'm just curious about is, so this all makes sense from just a principle standpoint. These tools that we have seem like a perfect match to the need. And so my question is, I guess, how do you convince people to invest in this? We have the funding mechanisms that are available for, ABA for, individuals with autism and related developmental disabilities, largely. But this is a novel space. So you guys are kind of, pioneering, something that perhaps a lot of potential clients or stakeholders, call them what you will, don't really know about. So how have you gotten, teams to value you to the point of engaging you from a service delivery model?
Great question. What our philosophy was strategic partnerships. So going in as behavior scientists, we're kind of used to now just having a coach or an athletic director, or even on higher levels, conversations that we've had with professional organizations. They'll look at you probably with a deer in headlights, and the first thing they're asking is like, what is that again? How does that apply? From there, you want to convey that, this practical application can be applied in so many different ways, but you have to speak their language. And one of the things that we decided was to strategically partner up with individuals that are operating that space, that are the subject matter experts. One of the strategic partnerships that we have is with a basketball training facility organization in the DC metropolitan area called ProFit Training, basketball training. And the head of that organization is a former Georgetown Hoyas center. He was actually the center of the basketball team that last went to the Final Four in 2007, I believe. So working with content experts in basketball, gymnastics, football, putting together curriculums based off of their knowledge of the sport and our knowledge of the science, and then crafting how we're going to market to the space that we're not used to. Back in the day, and Beverly can probably attest to this more so, that the field, before it was mandated, there was funding, clinicians went out and hustled up for business. I know Beverly, she could talk about that all day long. She was out on she was saying the streets were hard out there, but, we managed to gain clientele. Well, it's recreating the system all over again, to allow ourselves to be in positions to talk about what we can do, to have those individuals that we partner up that have the knowledge of marketing themselves, how they marketed their experiences, passing that along, and combining this all together to create a product that parents, teams, organizations can help to not look at and see how it works for their organization or their particular athlete. So it's just a matter of just really kind of understanding that, this is something that we're not, we're not unaccustomed to. We've had to do this in the past, but we're doing it in a different manner.
So it sounds like some of those hard lessons learned through the development of Sparks were paying dividends with your development of Team ABA.
Absolutely. We learned a lot from our experience in developing the Sparks Group and applying that knowledge and expertise to kind of building something really special with Team ABA.
Deciding to take the next step in your career is a big decision. Whether it's moving from a registered behavioral technician to a board-certified behavior analyst, or learning how to apply behavior analysis within a school setting, the University of Cincinnati online behavior analysis program can be a rewarding way to advance your career. Gain cutting-edge marketability, knowledge, and skills to increase your earning potential, all while improving the quality of life for others. The University of Cincinnati, a premier research and higher learning institution, ranks in the top tier of America's best colleges by U.S. News & World Report, and it's fully accredited through the Higher Learning Commission. So if this sounds interesting to you, please visit behavioranalysisuc.online for more information.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up the point that Kirk made is that I am old enough to remember the time before insurance companies paid for services working with children with autism, and so it was a different landscape. You had to. The one thing that that was different was that parents were sort of told that this method, even though they didn't necessarily understand that, they were kind of sold that this method would impact their child's life dramatically. And so, they were sort of seeking that, but it was still very much a sales job in terms of convincing, because if you go, back then, the idea was that you were doing 30 to 40 hours a week. And that's a lot of money to expect someone to, put out of their pocket. And so having that background, I think that we have sort of been able to transition that into this field. I think having the content experts is really critical as well, because if you can convince someone who is already a coach or is already a trainer that this works, they will also become a part of your marketing team, because if they believe that what you're doing makes a difference, then they will help you bridge that gap between, I always say sort of like, I am a geek at heart. Kirk is not. Kirk is one of the cool kids. He was always, one of the cool kids, but I was not. I'm a geek at heart. And so being able to have a content expert who is already in that arena, who already speaks that language, if I can talk to them, they can help build that bridge between my brain and, the cool kids world, if you will.
I see. So seems like you guys have a lot of complementary skills. So can you give me an example of some of the interventions that you've been involved with that have led to measurable performance improvements?
Sure. So I go back to our first project, which was at University City High School in St. Louis, Missouri. Actually, University City, and in the process, and we were able to present our findings at ABAI this past year. So we were tasked to work with this team on two particular behaviors, which would be to improve free throw shooting, and then also cut down on turnovers with this basketball team. This basketball team, the previous year, were the same kids, maybe added on a couple of other pieces to their team. And one of the things that we were tasked to really work on is their free throw shooting. So we applied, first we started with baseline to see what these kids can do, but we put it in a pre-operative environment where the kids were stepping to the free throw line, picking up from the shooting rack and just shooting, not going through their normal free throw shooting routine, nothing extra, just picking up a ball and shooting. From there, we were able to apply different treatment that we determined based off of the initial data and gradually grow that. Some of the things that we learned, again, from the content experts, is to really how to really break down into a task analysis the proper shooting form. So just if anyone who doesn't really kind of know about shooting a basketball, there's an acronym called BEEF, which is balance, eyes, elbow, and follow through. So it was really easy to break it down into a TA and then give that immediate feedback to help the players go along. As we're going along, we're taking data, we're putting it on an SSC, and kind of making decisions, but making decisions based off of if we're seeing acceleration or deceleration in their shooting. So we were fortunate enough to see some progression. One of the setbacks is anytime, and we see this with our discussions with coaches, that that with any type of organization, any type of team, any type of extracurricular activities, which this basketball team just called it analytics, like the getting the buy-in from the complete coaching staff was really the most difficult part. I think the kids where their immediate buy-in came in of like their competition with the other kids, seeing if they're doing better than the other kids. But then also what we found was that there was a lot of just like encouragement from the team, just like, really kind of like building on the camaraderie because they're in this special group, because we picked the starting five and then the first three individuals off the bench there. So in our findings, we did see some acceleration from our interventions. However, not the acceleration that we anticipated, because we had such limited time with the players. So it was really encouraging to find that our interventions were working and kind of going along with like, some of the clinical model that we put together, that we can actually see some results. I don't have previous information as far as what they shot as a team the previous year, as far as a team from the foul line, but I could say that the team made up of the same kids with a couple of added pieces. The previous year that they won, I believe, only 6 games within their conference, and the school had not won a conference championship since the mid-90s. This team, with excellent coaching from their staff, Coach Lee, Coach Washington, Coach Jeffers over there at U City, with our help, with myself and our team, Natalie and Wes and Rick as well, we were able to see a conference championship and to see the growth of this basketball team. So we're really quite proud of the work that we did with U City, and continue to kind of take that experience and move on to other teams as we're working with right now.
Are you guys working in other areas, other sports as well, or is that on the horizon? I'm just kind of curious, like, where are you guys going from here? That sounds like an awesome story, and I'm sure that it's possible to kind of iterate that in different settings. And So tell us a little bit about kind of what you're working on now and where you'd like to go moving forward.
Sure. Well, we're working on a lot of stuff. And the other sports that we're working on, and obviously, we want to take it slow because we have to develop curriculum to go ahead into new sports. And obviously, for individuals that are on this call, developing curriculum, we know what that looks like and how long that takes. So, but we're working with gymnasts, and that's really the cool part, because when, I'm actually working directly, I'm doing direct services with a gymnast where Beverly is the supervisor of that. And then also we have a content expert who is in a graduate program at Chicago School and is also a certified gymnastics coach, a level 4 gymnastics coach that will be a future behavior analyst as well.
Cool.
But I'm the one who has to, since she is remote and all, I'm the one that actually has to deliver the services. So imagine a 6 foot, 250 pound plus man who only thing knows about gymnastics is Nadia Comaneci, trying to model a back walkover. And ask me 5 months ago, Kirk, do you know what a back walkover is? I could not tell you, but it's really allowing us to kind of learn and grow as we've developed curriculum and developed different interventions there. So we're working in gymnastics. We are in the initial stage of working on our football protocol and curriculum. And we hope to just to really expand a lot into different sports like golf and volleyball in 2020. But I would be remiss to not talk about our new venture that we have for fourth quarter in the health and fitness world as well, which, I could turn that over to Beverly because Beverly has been really quiet. It's really kind of eerie that she's now quiet.
I can verify for the listener she is still on this call.
But Beverly can talk a little bit more about our health and fitness venture.
Can I just want to make a comment real quick, and then I'm all ears about the health and fitness stuff because I find that aspect of behavior analysis fascinating too. But with regard to golf, I in my formative years, all through high school and college, worked. My kind of summer job was working at a golf course, and I've always thought that if behavior analysis can make inroads in the golf community, that is a license to print money. Because the most frustrating thing in the world is to make a terrible golf shot.
Oh, tell me about it.
We could reliably, it's when someone takes the time to figure out a way to reliably produce behavior change in golfers and can, more, I don't say mass market's probably not the right word, but deliver that at scale. That's the license to print money right there. So
exactly. You're absolutely right, Matt.
People will pay anything to improve their golf game because there's no shortage of all these, training devices and all sorts of crazy stuff that people throw money at, and oftentimes with very little results, based off of claims that aren't verified by any type of assessment or analysis.
You're absolutely right. And it's amazing that when you think about interventions like Tag Teach, Tag Teach is built for sports like golf, and we utilize a lot of Tag Teach interventions with our basketball players, and especially in our gymnasts as well. But just applying that, just like you said, to improve a shot, to get it consistent, to consistently hit the green every time. It's just like you said. It's literally you can print your own money like it's Fort Knox. Not to say that we're in this industry to again burn cigars, $100 bills, but but you're absolutely correct with that assessment.
Yeah, well, yeah. Suffice to say, there's a market there. Let's just put it that way, right?
Exactly.
There's a funding mechanism, more than likely. So
Exactly.
all right. So let's talk about this health and fitness stuff.
Well, actually, before we do that, I also wanted to highlight that we also have workshops that we're developing, and so that people can kind of be on the lookout for that. So we have what we're calling the Elite Performance Specialist Workshop, where we will basically go through the process of learning how to work with athletes using behavior analysis. And so we are, of course, opening that workshop up to behavior analysts, but we are also looking to expand to those outside of the behavior analyst world, so that we're looking at coaches and trainers who we can train to be more systematic in the way that they are working with their athletes. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as well. And so we will have a series of workshops around the country in 2020. So just kind of something to be on the lookout for.
Very good. And we'll make sure that people know where to find that in the show notes for today's episode. So.
Perfect.
Great.
And then I actually am going to have to run in a minute. So we are moving into the health, fitness, and wellness department, if you will. And so sort of our first foray into that will be what we're calling, well, we haven't landed on a specific name yet, so I'm not even really sure. Hopefully you can edit some of this out. But,
well, just don't say it, and we'll connect with me later, and we'll because it'll be probably a week or maybe a couple before we air this episode. So
okay, perfect. Sure. But we are doing some group fitness, group personal training, where we're going to use behavior analysis to help people meet their fitness goals, and through group fitness. We're doing 3 to 5 participants, and helping them set specific goals, specific concrete measurable goals, so that they can work out. Really, that's the summary of it.
Nice. Well, again, just like golf, I think that's another area, like Pat Fryman talks about, like the middle of the bell curve of humanity. And, that wellness is even more so, central to everyone's needs than, say, driving the golf ball more, straighter and longer, right. So that is definitely, a bullseye, if you will, market wise. So that sounds really exciting. There's a lot of cool stuff going on in behavior analysis and fitness, just, kind of looking at some of the Facebook groups like the behavior analysts get fit and other sorts of things. So I think there's a lot of folks who are kind of endeavoring into these newer markets.
Well, and it's interesting. I know, like you said, there's behavior analysts get fit, and I think there's one, there's a group for runners. And it's just really interesting because I think that we have a really great opportunity to expand beyond our little world and to talk to other people, because we know that this works, and it's just a matter of selling it to other people. And once they see the results, they will buy into it. It's just a matter of just going out and making it happen.
Yeah, and I think one other thing too, that we're in this kind of almost embarrassment of riches these days with the availability of data to analyze. Whether we're talking about Strava or just your, the thing on your phone that counts your steps, or things like MyFitnessPal where you can easily track calories. And there's so many different ways to get information that you can actually look at and analyze over time. It's just amazing. So, so I know you have to run, but I know you also said that you had some thoughts for the newly minted. I know Kirk already gave dispenses.
Yeah, I
earlier.
already gave out the bag a little bit, but Beverly can take us on home.
Well, so in general, for new behavior analysts, I think that it's really important to be humble. I think that that's something that we as a field probably need to work on, and learning how to communicate. And I think that that's critical regardless of, excuse me, regardless of the area that you're going to work with. Learning to communicate with those outside of our field is so critical. And I don't know that our graduate programs are spending enough time talking about it. But, even when you're working with families with kids with autism, I actually had a conversation recently with a mom who just said, when I talk to you people, that was the word she used. When I talk to you people, she's like, you use all of this language that's really intimidating. And she's like, it's already hard enough without people just kind of, she's like, I do research and I feel like I'm pretty intelligent and I don't know what you're talking about. So how would a parent who doesn't have my resources or who isn't at this same level, how would they feel? And so I think that learning to communicate, learning to translate our behavior analytic speech to common everyday language, whether you're working with families with autism or you're working with athletes or whoever you're working with, I think that that is the best advice that I can give. Because if you can talk about the science in everyday language, then one, you really understand it. And two, it will make you more successful with the clients that you choose to work with.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's a case to be made for, I think you hit the nail on the head there with, saying how, what are we doing in graduate training programs for this? Because we were actually doing the opposite. We're training students, to speak in Cooperese, and it's, once you become fluent in that, then you have to kind of get unfluent. You have to get bilingual, if you will, and that's a really hard thing to do. And so, I think the development of those soft skills, man, I couldn't agree more. So,
can I add really quick to that point? It goes to the acronym of KISS, to really keep it simple. That, to your point, just kind of like understanding the white book and then kind of throwing it out. When talking to a new population, even an existing population, just like Beverly said, one of the things, again, just like really that's been really important to us is to have those partnerships, and kind of like, having them coach us up a little bit, that, you want to say this to this coach or to this parent, and not get into like generalization or just any of the vocabulary, the terms that we know, so we're so familiar with. But really, again, like, just being humble, just like Beverly said, that it's really hard for us to kind of like venture into areas that are kind of unknown. So why don't you just partner up with someone who's already in that space and kind of develop something that's really amazing, kind of piggybacking off of, their skill set, their particular skill set, and the skill set that you bring. Beverly and I are a living example of this, that she has tremendous skill sets, so many different skill sets that I will never have. And the same thing with us, and it works. We found a way to make it work, and I think that for the advice that I can give for individuals in the field who are looking to go into other areas that are outside the DD community, that really partner up with someone to kind of help you along, because like, you're not going to know everything, and we need to kind of scale that back, that we want to change the world, and we're so passionate and aggressive about changing the world, but we don't always have the necessary tools or the scope of practice, and we have to kind of rely on other individuals as well. So, that's kind of the thing that I would like to part with, especially working in the sport industry. really find those partnerships out there and really go outside of the conferences that we go to. Go to the sports psychology conferences. Go to the National Basketball Conference that's always at the Final Four, the NCAA Final Four. Go to those conferences and make a name for yourself. If you've already made a name for yourself in our field, that's absolutely wonderful. But we're targeting a market that is constantly dealing in different areas that we're not practicing. So really kind of expand your reach by attending those conferences and those events to allow yourself to be in front of those individuals that you're marketing to.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining me today, leaving us with such wise words of wisdom. Thanks very much. It's been a fun conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having us. It has been so much fun.
Yes, ditto. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Cicoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.